Imagine a ring around a star so big that it's the size of the Earth's orbit around the Sun. 660 million miles in circumference, 1,000,000 miles wide, spinning at 770 miles a second to impart artificial gravity to the interior surface. It's an artificial world with more surface area than 30 million Earths, all laid flat end to end. And no one knows who made it. Hey, welcome to Sci Fi Secrets. This video is about the novel Ringworld by Larry Niven. It's an iconic book in sci-fi. Personally, I would say it's one of the best books of all time, but I probably say that about every book on this channel, so take that as you will. In my copy of Ringworld, as soon as you open the cover, you are confronted with a list of 4 travelers come to the Ringworld. Let me read it to you. Louis Wu, human and old, bored with having lived too fully for far too many years, seeking a challenge and all too capable of handling it. Nessus, a trembling coward, a puppeteer with a built-in survival pattern of nonviolence, except that this particular puppeteer is insane. Tila Brown, human, a wide-eyed youngster with no allegiance, no experience, no abilities, and all the luck in the world. Speaker to animals, Xen, large, orange-furred, and carnivorous, and one of the most savage life forms known in the galaxy. Why did these disparate individuals come together? How could they possibly function together? And where, in the name of anything sane, were they headed? There are a few minor variations in different prints of this novel. Originally, Niven intended on Ringworld being a basically standalone book. He didn't plan on direct sequels. Although it is set in the known space universe, so the door was always wide open if he decided to make more Ringworld novels, or even if he just wanted to mention it in another story. For example, if you want more information about the Quantum 2 hyperdrive, and the explosion at the core of the galaxy, that are both mentioned in the beginning of this book, then you can read the short story At the Core. In both short story collections Neutron Star and Crashlander, which I previously did a video on. But the book was such an overwhelming success, and so many requested a sequel, that he felt obligated to oblige. But first, he wanted to address some other letters he had gotten. You see, Ringworld was so widely received that many of the people that wrote back to him were experts in the field, and they corrected him on a few mistakes he made. Uncharacteristically for an author, Niven actually edited his book for later releases to have more accurate numbers. So now let's get into the book. In the nighttime heart of Beirut, in one of a row of general address transfer booths, Louis Wu flicked into reality. His foot-length queue was as white and shiny as artificial snow. His skin and depilated scalp were chrome yellow. The irises of his eyes were gold. His robe was royal blue with a golden stereoptic dragon superimposed. In the instant he appeared, he was smiling widely, showing pearly, perfectly standard teeth. Smiling and waving, but the smile was already fading, and in a moment it was gone, and the sag of his face was like a rubber mask melting. Louis Wu showed his age. For a few moments, he watched Beirut stream past him, the people flickering into the booths from unknown places, the crowds flowing past him on foot now that the sidewalks had been turned off for the night. Then the clocks began to strike 23. Louis Wu straightened his shoulders and stepped out to join the world. In Resht, where his party was still going full blast, it was already the morning after his birthday. Here in Beirut, it was an hour earlier. In the balmy outdoor restaurant, Louis bought rounds of Rocky and encouraged the singing of songs in Arabic and Interworld. He left before midnight for Budapest. Had they realized yet that he had walked out on his own party? They would assume a woman had gone with him, that he would be back in a couple of hours, but Louis Wu had gone alone, jumping ahead of the midnight line, hotly pursued by the new day. 24 hours was not long enough for a man's 200th birthday. They could get along without him, Lewis's friends could take care of themselves. In this respect, Lewis's standards were inflexible. In Budapest were wine and athletic dances, natives who tolerated him as a tourist with money, tourists who thought he was a wealthy native. He danced the dances and he drank the wines and he left before midnight. In Munich he walked. The air was warm and clean. It cleared some of the fumes from his head. He walked the brightly lighted slidewalks, adding his own pace to their 10-mile-per-hour speed. It occurred to him then that every city in the world had slidewalks, and that they all moved at 10 miles per hour. The thought was intolerable. Not new, just intolerable. Louis Wu saw how thoroughly Munich resembled Cairo and Resht, and San Francisco, and Topeka, and London, and Amsterdam. The stores along the slidewalk sold the same products in all the cities of the world. These citizens who passed him tonight looked all alike, dressed all alike. Not Americans, or Germans, or Egyptians, but mere flatlanders. In 3.5 centuries, the transfer booths had done this to the infinite variety of Earth. They covered the world in a net of instantaneous travel. The difference between Moscow and Sydney was a moment of time and a 10th star coin. Inevitably, the cities had blended over the centuries until place names were only relics of the past. San Francisco and San Diego were the northern and southern ends of one sprawling coastal city. But how many people knew which end was which? Tange few these days. Pessimistic thinking for a man's 200th birthday. But the blending of the cities was real. Lewis had watched it happen. All the irrationalities of place and time and custom blended into one big rationality of city, worldwide, like a dull gray paste. Did anyone today speak Dutch, English, French, Spanish? Everyone spoke interworld. Style and body paints changed all at once, all over the world, in one monstrous surge. Time for another sabbatical? Into the unknown, alone in a single ship, with his skin and eyes and hair their own color, a beard growing randomly over his face. Nuts, said Lewis to himself. I just got back from a sabbatical. 20 years ago. But it was wearing on towards midnight. Louis Wu found a transfer booth, inserted his credit card in the slot, and dialed for Sevilla. He emerged in a sunlit room. What the tange? He wondered, blinking. The transfer booth must have blown its zap. In Sevilla, there should have been no sunlight. Louis Wu turned to dial again, then turned back and stared. He was in a thoroughly anonymous hotel room, a setting prosaic enough to make its occupant doubly shocking. Facing him, from the middle of the room, was something neither human nor humanoid. It stood on 3 legs, and it regarded Louis Wu from 2 directions. From 2 flat heads mounted on flexible, slender necks. Over most of its startling frame, the skin was white and gloves soft, but a thick, coarse brown mane ran from between the beast's necks, back along its spine, to cover the complex-looking hip joint of the hind leg. The 2 forelegs were set wide apart, so that the beast's small, clawed hooves formed almost an equilateral triangle. Lewis guessed that the thing was an alien animal. In those flat heads, there would be no room for brains, but he noticed the hump that rose between the base of the necks, where the mane became a thick protective mop. And a memory floated up from 18 decades behind him. This was a puppeteer, a Pearson's puppeteer. Its brain and skull were under the hump. It was not an animal. It was at least as intelligent as a man, and its eyes, one to a head in deep bone sockets, stared fixedly at Louis Wu from 2 directions. Lewis tried the door, locked. He was locked out, not in. He could dial and vanish, but it never occurred to him. One does not meet a Pearson's puppeteer every day. The species had been gone from known space for longer than Louis Wu had been alive. Lewis said, "Can I help you?" "You can," said the alien, in a voice to spark adolescent dreams. Had Lewis visualized a woman to go with that voice, she would have been Cleopatra, Helen of Troy, Marilyn Monroe, and Lorelei Hunt's all rolled into one. Tange! The curse seemed more than usually appropriate. There ain't no justice. That such a voice should belong to a 2-headed alien of indeterminate sex. "Be not frightened," said the alien. "Know that you can escape if need be. In college, there were pictures of things like you. You've been gone a long time, or so we thought." The puppeteer's name is Nessus. Nessus has a proposal for Louis Wu, but he is cryptic about the details, only offering a single picture: a blue ring around a glowing dot. Louis is offered the job because he is the only living human to meet a new alien species. Louis is known for his wanderlust, and on his last trip to nowhere, his ship detected an explosion. He went to investigate, and he found the sole survivor of an alien ship that had an accident. Louis saved him, and the first Trinoc was met by humanity. Louis is looking for adventure, so he accepts and becomes the first recruit to Nessus's crew. They leave the hotel room together and enter the hotel's restaurant, where they encounter the second member of the crew, an enormous cat-like alien called a Kzinti or Kzin. A fearsome race, with long claws and longer teeth, but very short tempers. Nessus immediately insults a group of 4 of them, loudly declaring that he has their emperor as a pet. They bristle, but as ambassadors to Earth, they are the best-mannered Kzin in known space, and they do not eat him. Nessus then offers them a chance to regain their honor, for no honorable Kzin would be on Earth with the enemies that had defeated them so many times, forced to make deals with them and not even try to eat them. Ugh, humiliating. The lowest of the Kzin, one not even deserving of a name, agrees. He hopes to earn himself a name with whatever dangerous expedition Nessus offers, but he doubts that a cowardly puppeteer even knows what danger and honor are, so the others refuse. He is known as Speaker to Animals, because as an ambassador to Earth, that is his job. While they are waiting for Nessus's contacts to find the 4th crew member, Louis Wu convinces Speaker and Nessus to come to his house and meet his birthday party guests. While there, they discover that the 4th crew member is already at Louis's party, Tila Brown. Nessus chose Louis Wu because he knows that humans are useful, and Louis in specific for his background and positive relations with many alien species. Nessus chose Speaker because Kzin are great fighters, with powerful muscles, and Speaker in specific for his mild, for Kzin anyway, mannered personality, so basically because he is less likely to eat Nessus. But Nessus chose Tila Brown for her luck. The population controls allowed for a birthright lottery every year. If you wanted another kid and didn't have any more birthrights left, every person gets one by default, then you could enter the lottery and win a birthright that allowed you to have another child. Tila Brown was the 6th generation of lottery winners. To the puppeteers, this seemed like the humans were breeding for luck, and so they wanted the luckiest person possible on their crew. Louis thought this was insane. Luck isn't really a thing, and even if it was, it's not genetic. You can't breed for it. But Nessus was adamant, and Tila was persuasive in her own right, and convinced Louis to drop his opposition to her joining the crew. Once they were assembled, they flew out to Nereid, a moon of Neptune, or, more accurately, a natural satellite of Neptune. The outsiders rented Nereid from humanity, and the puppeteers had parked the longshot here for the past 2 centuries, ever since Beowulf Schaefer's trip to the core in it. On the platform sat a ship, but not just any ship, a ship with the only Quantum 2 hyperdrive ever made. The Quantum 1 hyperdrive, or just the hyperdrive, can travel at the insane speeds of light years every week. The Hyperdrive 2 could go 50 times faster than that, and there was only one in existence. This was the prize Nessus was offering in exchange for coming on the trip with him. There was only one problem. The Kzin and humanity were basically enemies. Not so much from humanity's point of view, but the Kzin see everyone as an enemy, just waiting to be conquered, and the Kzinti Empire had just tried that several times, but humanity beat them back and killed around 2/3 of their males in the process each time they attacked Earth. They also lost all the races they had previously enslaved, as well as many worlds they had colonized. Humanity beat them back, freed their slaves, and took over their colonies, but did not attack them and finish the job. Such strange creatures. And now the Kzinti did not have enough people and weapons to mount another attack, or they surely would. So Speaker did not want humans to have the hyperdrive too. He wanted to take it home so that the Kzin could finally have the techno-superiority to defeat the humans. He snuck a variable sword onto the ship, an invisibly thin line surrounded by a slaver stasis field that could cut through steel like butter. When he saw his opportunity, he took it. "I have a variable sword," said Speaker to Animals. "I urge calm." It took a moment for the words to register. Then Lewis turned, slowly, making no sudden gestures. The Kazin stood against a curved wall. In one clawed fist, he held something like an oversized jump rope handle. 10 feet from the handle, held expertly at the level of the Kazin's eyes, was a small glowing red ball. The wire which joined the ball to handle was too thin to be visible, but Lewis didn't doubt that it was there. Protected and made rigid by a slaver's stasis field, the wire would cut through most metals, including, if Lewis should choose to hide behind it, the back of Lewis's crash couch. And the Kazin had chosen a position such that he could strike anywhere in the cabin. At the Kazin's feet, Lewis saw the unidentified haunch of alien meat. It had been ripped open, and, of course, it had been hollow. "I would have preferred a more merciful weapon," said Speaker to Animals. "A stunner would have been ideal. I could not procure one in time. Lewis, take your hands off the controls and put them at the back of your couch." Lewis did. He had thought of playing with the cabin gravity, but the Kazin would have cut him in two if he'd tried it. "Now, if you will all remain calm, I will tell you what will happen next." "Tell us why," Lewis suggested. He was estimating chances. The red bulb was an indicator to tell Speaker where his invisibly thin wire blade ended. But if Lewis could grab that end of the blade and keep from losing his fingers in the process? No, the bulb was too small. "My motives should be obvious," said Speaker. The black markings around his eyes had taken on the look of a bandit's mask in a cartoon. The Kazin was neither tense nor relaxed, and he stood where he was almost impossible to attack. "I intend to give my world control of the Longshot. With the Longshot as a model, we will build more such ships. Such ships would give us a killing superiority in the next Man-Kazin war, provided that men do not also have designs for Longshot. Satisfactory?" Lewis made his voice sarcastic. "You couldn't be afraid of where we're going?" "No." The insult slid right past him. How would a Kazin recognize sarcasm? "You will all disrobe now, so that I may know that you are unarmed. When you have done so, I will request the puppeteer to don his pressure suit. We too will board the Longshot. Lewis and Tila will stay behind, but I will take your clothing and your luggage and your pressure suits. I will disable this ship. Doubtless, the outsiders, curious as to why you have not returned to Earth, will come to help you long before your life systems fail. Do you all understand?" Lewis Wu relaxed, and, ready to take advantage of any slip the Kazin might make, Lewis Wu glanced at Tila Brown from the corner of his eye and saw a horrible thing. Tila was bracing herself to jump a Kazin. Speaker would cut her in two. Lewis would have to move fast. "Don't be foolish, Lewis. Stand up slowly and move against the wall. You shall be the first to..." Speaker let the word trail off in a kind of croon. Lewis halted his leap, caught by a thing he didn't understand. Speaker to Animals threw back his big orange head and mewed, an almost supersonic squeal. He threw his arms wide as if to embrace the universe. The wire blade of his variable sword cut through a water tank without slowing noticeably. Water began dripping out on all four sides of the tank. Speaker didn't notice. His eyes didn't see. His ears didn't hear. "Take the weapon," said Nessus. Lewis moved. He approached cautiously, ready to duck if the variable sword should move his way. The Kazin was waving it gently, like a baton. Lewis took the handle from the Kazin's unresisting fist. He touched the proper stud, and the red ball retracted until it touched the handle. "Keep it," said Nessus. He clamped his jaw on Speaker's arm and led the Kazin to a crash couch. The Kazin made no resistance. He was no longer making sounds. He stared into infinity, and his great furry face showed only a vast calm. "What happened? What did you do?" Speaker to Animals, totally relaxed, stared at infinity and purred. "Watch," said Nessus. He moved carefully back from the Kazin's crash couch. He held his head high and rigid, not so much pointed as aimed, and at no time did his eyes leave the Kazin. The Kazin's eyes focused suddenly. They flickered from Lewis to Tila to Nessus. Speakered animals made plaintive snarling sounds, sat upright, and switched to interworld. That was very, very nice. I wish... He stopped, started over. Whatever you did, he told the puppeteer, do not do it again. I judged you to be a sophisticate, said Nessus. My judgment was accurate. Only a sophisticate would fear a tasp. Tila said, ah. Lewis said, tasp? The puppeteer addressed himself to speakered animals. You understand that I will use the tasp every time you force me to. I will use it if you make me uneasy, if you attempt violence too often, or if you startle me too often. You will soon become dependent on the tasp. Since the tasp is a surgically implanted part of me, you would have to kill me to possess it, and you would still be ignobly bound by the tasp itself. Very astute, said Speaker. Brilliantly unorthodox tactics. I will trouble you no more. Tange, will somebody tell me what a tasp is? Lewis's ignorance seemed to surprise everybody. It was Tila who answered. It jolts the pleasure centers of your brain. From a distance? Lewis hadn't known that was even theoretically possible. Sure, it does just what a touch of current does for a wirehead, but you don't need to drop a wire into your brain. Usually a tasp is just small enough to aim with one hand. Have you ever been hit by a tasp? None of my business, of course. Tila grinned, derision for his delicacy. Yes, I know what it feels like. A moment of, well, there's no describing it. But you don't use a tasp on yourself. You use it on someone who isn't expecting it. That's where the fun comes in. Police are always picking up taspers in the parks. Your tasps, said Nessus, induce less than a second of current. Mine induces approximately 10 seconds. The effect on speakered animals must have been formidable, but Lewis saw other implications. Oh, wow, that's beautiful. That's lovely. Who but a puppeteer would go around with a weapon that does good to the enemy? Who but a prideful sophisticate would fear too much pleasure? The puppeteer is quite right, said speakered animals. I would not risk the tasp again. Too many jolts from the puppeteer's tasp would leave me his willing slave. I, a Xin, slave to an herbivore. Let us board the long shot, Nessus said grandly. We have wasted enough time on trivialities. The name of the 1 Quantum 2 hyperdrive ship was the Long Shot, named as such by Beowulf Schaefer in the short story At the Core. Beowulf was the only person to ever fly the Long Shot until now. Actually, Beowulf was the only being to ever be inside the Long Shot as it moved before. Puppeteers were great engineers, but their fear of any danger made testing new devices almost impossible for them. Thankfully, they could hire other species or use robots for most tasks involving danger. The Long Shot, despite its hull being a sphere over a mile in diameter, had no room for any crew. Its massive size was taken up almost entirely with the experimental Quantum 2 hyperdrive. It was only designed with enough room for a single pilot inside. So Tila, Speaker, and Nessus all had to be placed in slaver stasis fields for the duration of the trip, so they could be stored in the small cargo compartment. Louis Wu flew the biggest and fastest single ship ever made, to the coordinates Nessus had given him. But there was no star, no planetary system. Louis woke up Nessus, who then set the ship's telescopes up for Louis to see his destination. 5 dim dots in a perfect pentagon formation. On the scope screen was a sprinkling of anonymous stars. Louis ran the magnification up until 5 dots in a regular pentagon, right? That is our destination. Good. Let me check the distance. Tange, that's wrong. Nessus, they're too far away. No comment. Well, they couldn't be ships, even if the distance meter isn't working. The puppeteer fleet must be moving at just under light speed. We'd see the motion. 5 dull stars in a regular pentagon. They were a fifth of a light year distant, and quite invisible to the naked eye. At present scope magnification, they would have to be full-sized planets. In the scope screen, one was faintly less blue, faintly dimmer than the others. A Kempler or a rosette. How very odd. Take 3 or more equal masses, set them at the points of an equilateral polygon, and give them equal angular velocities around their center of mass. Then the figure has stable equilibrium. The orbits of the masses may be circular or elliptical. Another mass may occupy the center of mass of the figure, Or the center of mass may be empty, it doesn't matter. The figure is stable, like a pair of Trojan points. The difficulty is that there are several easy ways in which a mass can be captured by a Trojan point. Consider the Trojan asteroids in Jupiter's orbit. But there is no easy way for 5 masses to fall accidentally into a Kepler or rosette. That's wild, Lewis murmured. Unique. Nobody's ever found a Kepler or rosette. He let it trail off. Here between the stars? What could be lighting those objects? Oh no, you don't, said Lewis Wu. You'll never make me believe it. What kind of an idiot do you take me for? What is it that you will not believe? You know Tange well what I won't believe. As you please. That is our destination, Lewis. If you will take us within range, a ship will be sent to match our velocity. The rendezvous ship was a number 3 hull, a cylinder with rounded ends and a flattened belly, painted shocking pink, and windowless. There were no engine apertures. The engines must be reactionless, thrusters of the human type, or something more advanced. On Ness's orders, Lewis had let the other ship do the maneuvering. The long shot, on fusion drives alone, would have required months to match velocities with the Puppeteer fleet. The Puppeteer ship had done it in less than an hour, blinking into existence alongside the Longshot with her access tubes already reaching like a glass snake towards the Longshot's airlock. Disembarking would be a problem. There wasn't room to release all the crew from stasis at once. More important, this would be Speaker's last chance to take control of the ship. Do you think he will obey my task, Lewis? No. I think he'll risk one more shot at stealing the ship. Tell you what we'd better do. They disconnected the instrument panel from the Longshot's fusion motors. It was nothing that the Kazin couldn't fix, given a little time and a touch of the mechanical intuition possessed by any toolmaker, but he would not have the time. Lewis watched the Puppeteer move through the tube. Nessus was carrying Speaker's pressure suit. His eyes were tightly closed, which was a pity because the view was magnificent. Free fall, said Tila when he opened her crash couch. Ooh, I don't feel so good. You better guide me. Lewis, are we there yet? Lewis told her a few details while he guided her to the airlock. She listened, but Lewis guessed she was concentrating on the pit of her stomach. She looked acutely uncomfortable. There'll be gravity on the other ship, he told her. Her eyes found the tiny rosette where Lewis pointed. It was a naked-eye object now, a pentagon of 5 white stars. She turned with astounded questions in her eyes. The motion spun her semicircular canals, and Lewis saw her expression change in a moment before she bolted into the airlock. Kepler rosettes were one thing. Freefall sickness was something else again. Lewis watched her recede against the unfamiliar stars. As the couch cover opened, Lewis said, "Don't do anything startling. I'm armed." The Kazin's orange face did not change expression. Have we arrived? Yeah, I've disconnected the fusion drive. You'd never reconnect it in time. We're in the sights of a pair of big ruby lasers. Suppose I were to escape in a hyperdrive. No, my mistake. We must be within a singularity. You're in for a shock. We're in 5 singularities. 5? Really? But you lied about the lasers, Lewis. Be ashamed. At any rate, the Kazin left his couch peaceably enough. Lewis followed with a variable sword at the ready. In the airlock, the Kazin stopped, suddenly caught by the sight of an expanding pentagon of stars. He could hardly have had a better view. The Longshot, edging close in hyperdrive, had stopped half a light hour ahead of the Puppeteer fleet. Something less than the average distance between Earth and Jupiter, but the fleet was moving at terrible speed, falling just behind its own light, so that the light which reached the Longshot came from much further away. When the Longshot stopped, the rosette had been too small to see. It had been barely visible when Tila left the lock. Now it was impressively large and growing at enormous speed. 5 pale blue dots in a pentagon, spreading across the sky, growing, spreading. For a flashing instant, there were 5 worlds around the Longshot, then they were gone. Not fading, but gone. The receding light reddened to invisibility, and Speaker to Animals held the variable sword. Fnagel's eyes, Lewis exploded. Don't you have any curiosity at all? The Kazin considered. I have curiosity, but my pride is much stronger. He retracted the wire blade and handed the variable sword back to Lewis. A threat is a challenge. Shall we go? Hyperdrives allow a ship to travel at much faster than light speed, but they do so in hyperspace. Whatever speed and direction they carry when they enter hyperspace, they retain when they leave hyperspace at their destination. So, Longshot was not going nearly fast enough to keep up with the fleet of worlds, and the crew needed to transfer to a smaller ship that had enough thrust to get them up to the same speed as the fleet of worlds in a reasonable amount of time. This is how the first wild humans ever set foot on the Puppeteer homeworld. And what a world it was! Instead of transfer booths, the Puppeteers had stepping discs. Discs that were just placed on the sidewalks, that when you stepped on, teleported you to the next block. These were set up so that every 3 paces in your chosen direction was another disc. You could travel miles in seconds. And you could walk across the entire planet in less than a day. It was only 3 steps to the next point of interest. And the buildings, each one more than a mile tall, with a background of perpetual night, lit only by the streetlights, and the light gleaming from the other 4 worlds. The other 4 worlds were different. They each had a set of artificial suns orbiting them so that the plants had enough light to grow. 4 beautiful blue and green moons in the sky. The Puppeteer's tech was terrifying in its ability. Here was a race that could move entire planets 5 at a time, and use them as their spaceships to go wherever they desire. This knowledge was chilling to Louis Wu and Speaker. Speaker said as much when they met Chiron, the leader of the Puppeteers. In hologram, of course. His reply was that they felt the same way about the mission they were on. The strange structure with the star-like light in the middle was just that, Chiron explained. A star with a spinning loop all the way around it at an orbit in the Goldilocks zone, the habitable zone of the star. And it was clearly artificially made. This strip of artificial land was almost 1 million miles wide and around 660 million miles long. This gives it the surface area of approximately 30 million Earths all laid out flat. The ring had a mass similar to Jupiter's, and a spin that imparted just under normal Earth gravity to the inside of the ring. But the most amazing part of all this was the forces involved. For the ring to be able to handle that much force, weighing as much as it does, it would have to be made of an entirely unknown substance with tensile strength orders of magnitude above anything the Kazin, humans, or even Puppeteers knew of. The crew was given a new ship, a warship without dedicated weapons. Every weapon on the ship was actually a useful device. For example, the fusion thrusters would move the ship rather well, but they could also be aimed at an enemy, spraying deadly radiation. A comms laser was required for communication, but if close enough, it could also saw a ship in half. The Puppeteers that designed the ship did not want to antagonize with weapons, but they also clearly didn't want to not have any weapons. So, in honor of that, Louis Wu named their new ship the Lying Bastard, and the 4 of them set out to the Ringworld. When they entered the Ringworld star system, they were still traveling at near the speed of light, so they began their deceleration and began to try and contact the Ringworld. Despite blazing like a star for several hours from all the thrusters firing at full blast to slow the ship down, the Ringworld made no attempts to contact the Lying Bastard. At the edge of the ring, they found a wall around 1,000 miles tall that was holding in the air on the other side. From out of the point at infinity, something came at them. It was a ledge, growing like another abstraction along the base of the rim wall. First the ledge appeared, then, mounted on the ledge, a row of upright rings. Straight at the lyre they came, straight at the bridge of Louis's nose. Louis shut his eyes and threw his arms up to protect his head. He heard a whimper of fear. Death should have come in that instant. When it didn't, he opened his eyes. The rings were going by in a steady stream, and he realized that they were no more than 50 miles across. Nessus was curled in a ball. Tila, her palms pressed flat against the transparent hull, was staring avidly outward. Speaker was fearless and attentive at the control board. Perhaps he was better than Louis at judging distance. Or perhaps he was faking it. The whimper could have come from Speaker. Nessus uncurled. He looked out at the rings, which were smaller now, converging. Speaker, you must match velocities with the Ringworld. Hold us in position by thrusting at 1 gravity. We must inspect this. Centrifugal force is an illusion, a manifestation of the law of inertia. Reality is centripetal force, a force applied at right angles to the velocity vector of a mass. The mass resists, tends to move in its accustomed straight line. By reason of its velocity and the law of inertia, the ring world tended to fly apart. Its rigid structure would not allow that. The ring world applied its own centrifugal force to itself. The lyre, matching speeds at 770 miles per second, had to match that centripetal force. Speaker matched it. The lyre hovered next to the rim wall, balanced on 0.992 g of thrust, while her crew inspected the spaceport. The spaceport was a narrow ledge, so narrow as to be a dimensionless line until Speaker moved the ship inward. Then it was wide enough to dwarf a pair of tremendous spacecraft. The craft were flat-nosed cylinders, both of the same design, an unfamiliar design, yet clearly the design of a fusion ram ship. These ships were intended to fuel themselves, picking up interstellar hydrogen in scoops of electromagnetic force. One had been cannibalized for parts, so that it stood with its guts open to the vacuum and its intimate structure exposed to alien eyes. Windows showed around the upper rim of the intact ship, allowing those eyes to gauge that ship's size. In the random starlight, the glitter of windows was precisely like crystal candy sprinkled on a cake. Thousands of windows. That ship was big. And it was dark. The entire spaceport was dark. Perhaps the beings who used it did not need light in the visible frequencies. But to Louis Wu, the spaceport looked abandoned. "I don't understand the rings," said Tila. "Electromagnetic cannon," Louis answered absently, "for takeoffs." "No," said Nessus. "Oh?" "The cannon must have been intended for landing the ships. One can even surmise the method used. The ships must go into orbit alongside the rim wall. It will not attempt to match the ring's velocity, but will position itself 25 miles from the base of the rim wall. As the ring rotates, the coils of the electromagnetic cannon will scoop up the ship and accelerate it to match the velocity of the ring. I compliment the ring engineers. The ship need never come close enough to the ring to be dangerous." "You could also use the ring for takeoff." "No. Observe the facility to our left." "I'll be tanged," said Louis Wu. The facility was little more than a trap door, big enough to hold one of the ram ships. It figured. 770 miles per second was ram scoop speed. The ring's launching facility was merely a structure for tumbling the ship off into the void. The pilot would immediately accelerate away on ram scoop fusion power. "The spaceport facility seems to be abandoned," said Speaker. "Is there power in use?" "My instruments sense none. There are no anomalous hotspots, no large-scale electromagnetic activities. As for the sensors, which operate the linear accelerator, they may use less power than we can sense." "Your suggestion?" "The facilities may still be in operational condition. We can test this by proceeding to the mouth of the linear accelerator and entering." Nessus curled himself into a ball. "Wouldn't work," said Louis. "There could be a key signal to start the thing, and we don't know it. It might react only to a metal hull. If we tried to go through the cannon at the speed of the ring world, we'd hit one of the coils and blow everything to bits. I have flown ships under similar conditions during simulated war maneuvers." "How long ago?" "Perhaps too long. Never mind. Your suggestion?" "The underside," said Louis. The puppeteer uncurled at once. On the bottom side of the ring was the world above, but in negative. Bulges could be seen that were clearly seas on the other side, dimples that were entire mountain ranges. Finally, the decision was made to go above the ring and inspect the shadow squares. But as they approached, they slowly cut the engines, and the moment their changing projected trajectory impacted the ring, automated defenses fired on the lying bastard. Thankfully, the automatic defensive systems activated the slaver's stasis field in time to save their lives, but everything on the outside of the ship's general products hull was vaporized, including their engines. Now, on a purely ballistic trajectory, the crew had no control over the ship. And because the automated defenses shot them down when their trajectory impacted the ring, that meant they now had no hope of anything else. The systems that were designed to protect the ring from impacts had assured that the lying bastard would impact the ring. If they had been a normal ship without a general products haul, or if they had just been an asteroid, they would have been completely vaporized and the system would have done its job. But since a general products haul is a puppeteer invention that is impervious to everything but visible light, the meteor defenses had the opposite effect and ensured an impact. As the lying bastard drifted, its elliptical orbit took it between two of the shadow squares, and then suddenly the ship activated its slaver stasis systems again. When time returned to the crew of the lying bastard, they discovered that some foreign object, a string of incredible strength and sharpness, had been wrapped around their ship. When Speaker tried to remove the line, it cut his metal tool in half like butter. This seemed very similar to the variable sword that Speaker had tried to use as a weapon earlier, but a variable sword is inflexible. It is a tiny string encased in a slaver stasis field, meaning that it cannot be bent by any force in the universe. But this line around the ship was flexible, but seemingly just as strong, as it was apparently holding the shadow squares together and was allowing them to spin at greater than orbital velocity, meaning that if the strings broke, the shadow squares would go flying out and possibly impact the Ringworld. And the lying bastard had seemingly broken at least one of these lines and wrapped it around itself. This didn't affect the trajectory enough to make the ship miss impacting the Ringworld, though, and the crew of 4 was forced to watch the ring slowly rise up and finally impact the ship, where once again, the slaver stasis field automatically activated and saved their lives for the 3rd time in a row. Alright, so obviously this is turning out to be a real long video, so I had to split it into 2. So the second half should be out pretty quick, within the next few days to a week or 2 at the tops. So I'll get all that done, and then you guys can watch the rest of it. Hope you liked it so far. Thanks for watching.